Question number 3. Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by his reported statement from February this year that he is not overly concerned about the broader impact of the slump in dairy prices?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, in the context it was made, yes.
What context was that?
There is a difference between being concerned for farmers and being concerned that the dairy sector will drag the rest of the economy into recession. And of course we've seen that won't necessarily happen because of the GDP figures today. Of course we are concerned with the welfare of farmers, but this doesn't detract from the fact that we're seeing continued growth across the rest of the economy. Despite the fall in dairy prices, for example, exports actually increased by almost $2 billion for New Zealand last year. And as I mentioned in the earlier question, tourism, beef exports, international education and wine are just 4 examples of that growth.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is Waimate Mayor Craig Rowley wrong when he says that the dairy downturn is going to have, quote, a massive onflow in his town and that, quote, there will be no winners? It's a struggle for everybody. Or should the people of Waimate not be overly concerned either?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, there obviously are some towns that are being affected by the downturn in dairy prices, and I can think of a number that I have visited in recent times that are affected on that basis. And they, of course, will be concerned because of their local economic environment. My point is to the member who constantly says that the only thing in New Zealand is the dairy industry is that the figures we have now prove that New Zealand has a diversified economy which is growing well. And that's actually good for all those towns, because if we weren't growing well at this point, they'd have more reason to be concerned.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is agribusiness economist Stuart Ford wrong when he says that, quote, the flow-on effects for places like Christchurch are absolutely massive from the dairy downturn? Or should the people of Christchurch not be overly concerned either?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Christchurch economy is New Zealand's second largest and has a whole range of industries in it. Grant, just quieten down for a little
Order.
Wait to get your question answered.
Well, order. Complete the answer, please.
So my point, Mr Speaker, is that the Christchurch economy is a large economy which is diversified in areas such as ICT, high-tech manufacturing, construction, the food sector more generally, including the meat sector, a whole range of fisheries production. The Christchurch economy is a strong economy. It will, of course, be affected to some degree by the dairy downturn, but as we've seen across New Zealand as a whole, the New Zealand economy continues to perform well and is one of the highest performing economies in the OECD, notwithstanding the challenges of the dairy industry.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of that answer, isn't what the GDP numbers actually show is that whatever growth we do have isn't sustainable because it doesn't come through increased productivity or output, but rather comes from population increase and debt-fuelled household spending?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, the member's talking points are simply wrong. But where he has a point is if you remove every part of the New Zealand economy as growing, you'll find that the balance is not growing. It's a bit like a Monty Python sketch, but if you remove immigration, education, tourism, the wine industry, the meat industry, the ICT industry, and for all I know, ethnic restaurants, you will find that there's no growth in the New Zealand economy.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuta.
Thank you, sir. Does the Minister not think that his current apathy and silence on New Zealand dairy farmers opens this government up to the very reasonable label of fair weather friend?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think there are some parties that could be called fair weather friends of the dairy sector, but it isn't this one, Mr Speaker. The government is very involved and has always been involved in the dairy sector. And where was the member's party on, well, the TPP for a kick-off, on irrigation, on encouragement of the PGP program, which encourages the development and progression up the value chain of the dairy industry, Mr Speaker, all of these things this government has been involved in for a very long time, and I'm pleased the member is finally turning up with some concern for the dairy industry.
Order. Question number 4, Stuart Smith.